masks.
Alicia, we need more masks. Do you have another box?
Masks.
Masks. Yeah.
No, you got copies of the charge, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
All right, we'll bring the jury in now, Katie, thank you. Jury entering. All right, be seated, everyone. Hope everyone had a nice weekend. We're ready to proceed with the trial. We're at the point now where we're going to hear closing arguments, also referred to commonly as summations from counsel. And we'll hear first from the defense, Mr. Balinkas.
Before I start, I'd like to thank you all for your service. The time spent, your attention is greatly appreciated. I know what a huge sacrifice it was for you to serve on this case. This is what makes this country great. This process that we've gone through is what distinguishes us from every other country in the world. It's been an honor and a pleasure to try this case before you. The way this works, ladies and gentlemen, is that I sum up first. The prosecutor goes after me. I will not be able to comment or dispute anything that he says. As the judge told you, and I'm sure he'll tell you again, what the attorneys say is not evidence. Because I can't respond, I'm going to ask you to listen carefully to everything he says. Make sure the evidence supports what he says. Because if you remember in his opening statement, he told you when Michael Barison drove down to the farmhouse and confronted Lauren Kanarek, he was angry, he was furious. Those were his words. I submit there is no evidence whatsoever in this record to support that statement. To the contrary, it's the opposite. Even Robert Goodwin and Lauren Kanarek described Michael Barisone as calm. He used the word sorrowful. It was the defense that brought out that Lauren Kanarek was the one that was pissed. That's her word. She was the one that came stomping down to confront Michael Barisone. She's the one who described herself in her original statement as being Miss Badass. The same description of her conduct with an earlier altercation, where she got up into Michael Barisone's face. She pushed him back 20 feet or so. He tried to leave. She prevented him. Remember? She slammed his door shut. He was pleading with her to leave. Those were her words. with respect to the law of insanity. The judge will instruct you. Again, I'd just like to point out that the law recognizes that a forbidden act should not be punished criminally unless done with a knowledge of wrongdoing. If someone is found not guilty by reason of insanity, it does not mean that he will be freed or that he will be indefinitely committed to a mental institution. The court will hold hearings, make determinations as to whether, there are things to adequately protect that person, but more importantly, to protect the public. In my opening statement, I told you what I thought this case was about. Far different than as the prosecutor described it in his statement. After you've seen all the evidence, I hope you agree that it's not a simple cut and dry case as the prosecutor suggested. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that the state has not met its burden. I submit you should find Michael Barisone not guilty. Clearly, it's horrible that Lauren Kanarek was shot. No person should have to go through that. It's important that you look at the evidence, though. And I submit to you, as I did in my opening statement, that the only evidence as to how the shooting occurred comes from both Kanarek and Goodwin. The investigation starts and stops with them. It stops with Robert Goodwin pointing to Michael Barisone and saying he's the shooter. Two people who I had indicated in my opening, and I believe the evidence has confirmed, have a motive to lie, who have changed their stories, left important things out, important facts, and have now walked into this courtroom, put their hand on this Bible, looked you all in the eyes, and lied to you. The judge is going to instruct you as to a legal concept. It's called false in one, false in all. If you believe that someone intentionally came into this courtroom and intentionally lied about a significant fact, you could disregard their entire testimony. I submit that that's exactly what you should do with Lauren Kanarek and Robert Goodwin's testimony. Before I get into their specific testimony, I'd like to talk to you about the inadequate investigation that I mentioned in my opening statement. Reasonable doubt, the linchpin of the criminal justice system. Reasonable doubt may arise from the evidence itself or the lack of evidence. As I said, the prosecutor's entire case is based on Kanarek and Goodwin. The investigation stopped after Goodwin pointed Barisone out. The evidence is clear that the prosecutor never looked at the events leading up to the incident. The evidence will show that they ignored critical, precise evidence which would have shown you exactly what happened. Evidence that if they had conducted even the most basic scientific analysis, would have addressed many questions, unanswered questions, that I suggest you should have. Instead of doing that, instead of doing a thorough, unbiased investigation, they chose to rely on those two witnesses who clearly have a motive, who admitted in this courtroom to having a plan to destroy Michael Barisone and his business. Their whole case with regards to what happened prior to the shooting, when the beating of Michael Barisone occurred, where and when shots were fired, and when a dog attacked Michael Barisone in relationship to the beating that he received. Look, ladies and gentlemen, at the lack of evidence. Ask yourself, what is the most reliable and unbiased piece of evidence in any criminal trial? Video surveillance. You can't change its content. You can't alter it. You can't lie about what's actually depicted. Where's that video? Ask yourself, where is that video? Why didn't the prosecutor or the police seize it on that day? They're asking you to rely solely on the testimony of Robert Goodwin with regards to the content when he turned that off. That's the only evidence that they're asking you to rely on. Clearly, on the night in question, the Washington Township Police Department and the Morris County Prosecutor's Office were made aware of that camera and the possibility that it had captured this entire event. Why didn't someone from Blink testify? There's got to be some record with regards to those cameras. 3 different cameras, according to Goodwin. When was the camera turned on? When was it turned off? What did those cameras capture? How long do those images are they retained in the cloud? If you turn off an inside camera, as Goodwin said, does that affect and disable the camera outside that would have depicted this entire incident? Where's that testimony, ladies and gentlemen? They're asking you to rely on Robert Goodwin. Doesn't it seem a bit odd, too big of a coincidence, that Robert Goodwin just happened to turn off that video on the day of the shooting? The evidence before you shows that the camera was working on the day before, on the 6th. Recall the testimony about the video capturing Ruth Cox going into the farmhouse the day she got bit by the dog. I submit that's too big of a coincidence for you to rely on, especially when there's been testimony that Lauren Kanarek was talking about finishing Michael Barison that morning, especially when Kanarek and Goodwin had a discussion a few days before about disarming Michael Barison's web cameras. Why would anyone, ladies and gentlemen, under any circumstances, want to disable someone else's camera unless they didn't want what they were going to do to be depicted on that? You still want to believe Robert Goodwin? I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that that lack of evidence calls into question the entire sequence of events. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that that is reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt begins when the camera is shut off. The prosecutor has to answer that. You should demand a response to those questions. If he says it doesn't matter, I have 2 eyewitnesses, Mr. Belinkas. Question everything else that comes after that. Those witnesses had a plan to destroy Michael Barisone. One of those witnesses is the person who testified was the one who disabled and turned off that camera. Let me throw a little more gas on that fire. When the police get there, no one's holding a gun. The gun is on the ground. Why didn't the police do DNA, fingerprint testing on the gun, the magazine, or the casings? Why didn't they do that gunshot residue on Michael Barisone's hand to determine if he had fired the weapon? You saw in Captain Fellini's affidavit that the judge gave them the right to do that. Why not do that? If you are searching for the truth, do everything. Cross your T's, dot your I's. And why didn't they ask for gunshot residue testing on Kanarek or Goodwin? No. The prosecutor wants you to rely on those witnesses. Let's talk about their crime scene investigation. I submit that the investigation conflicts with Kanarek and Goodwin's testimony, their version of events. They say 3 shots were fired. Look at the photos and all the evidence that comes before you. They only found 2 shell casings. Where's the 3rd? You can't have a shot without a shell casing. I submit that Kanarek and Goodwin are lying about that 3rd shot. Is it possible, is it conceivable that one of the 2 bullets that had gone through Kanarek's body hit the door? Is that possible? Should anything have been done to try to confirm that or rule that out? If there is no 3rd shot, there is no attempted murder on Robert Goodwin. Let's look at Kanarek's testimony. Again, a witness who admitted on the stand to having a plan to destroy Michael Barison. Stop and think for a second of the magnitude of that statement. Not only was she angry or upset with Michael Barison, but she made a conscious decision to try to destroy someone. Who does that? Who goes to the extent that Lauren Kanarek and Robert Goodwin went to? If you recall Kanarek's testimony, the evidence came out on cross, not on direct with the prosecutor's question, that prior to the shooting, she was planning on suing Michael Barisone. I also brought out that she currently is suing Michael Barisone and has a financial interest in the outcome. I submit, if you believe Lauren Kanarek walked into this courtroom, put her hand on this Bible, and intentionally lied to you, disregard her testimony. Why do I say that? Now, the judge allowed certain evidence in for a limited purpose to impeach Ms. Kanarek, or evidence that relates to Michael Barisone's state of mind. This is not character evidence. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that Lauren Kanarek lied to you numerous times. Let's go over the lies. Number one, she lied about the recordings. She lied that all the recordings, where she and Goodwin were not present, were recorded from her locker in the stable. And Goodwin jumps in and says the exact same thing, but we'll deal with him in a minute. That statement is clearly a lie. There is evidence in the record that proves she's lying. Recall Robert Goodwin's testimony when he recorded the meeting with Kanarek, the father, and their own lawyer, where they're talking about the recording, and where Kanarek said that all the recordings were done from her locker. And you recall Robert Goodwin's response? At least that one, ha, ha. That testimony, number one, proves that Kanarek is lying about that, I submit, but it also casts doubt on their attorney, Edward David, which I submit to you, you should disregard everything that he says. He was one of the two people that Kanarek said gave him permission to do these secret recordings. When I questioned him or tried to talk to him with regards to anything about these recordings, what was his response? I have no recollection of that. You know, he wanted to stay away, as far away from that as he possibly could. Why? Well, maybe they were illegal. You know, maybe his license may be at jeopardy. He said over and over again, I don't recall having a discussion. Even when I showed him the transcript that I cross-examined Goodwin with, where they talk about the recording and where it's being done. Oh, I don't have a recollection. Oh, it was 2.5 years. He didn't even want to look at the transcript. What does that tell you? And if anyone else, strike that. And further with regards to Davis, when you recall his testimony, he testified on the phone that he heard a struggle. And then he said he testified here, a shot. But in his original statement, he said, clear as a bell, that he didn't know it was a shot. But after talking to everyone, being prepped for trial, he comes in here and testifies under oath that it was a shot. If you need further evidence that Kanarek is lying about those recordings, recall Mary Haskins Graves' testimony, Mary DeFranco's testimony, the attorney for Michael Barison, Stephen Tarshish's testimony. Those three witnesses unequivocally told you that during this time they had private conversations with Michael Barison in the office and in the club room. And that after those conversations, Lauren Kanarek posted their exact words. The office has been testified is over 100 feet away from her locker. The club room is literally 40 feet. Both rooms are separated from Lauren Kanarek's locker by a closed, solid door. Did she lie in this courtroom? I submit there's overwhelming evidence to support that. I submit that she lied about her social media posts. She lied about what she posted and who she posted about. Do you recall her testimony when I confronted her with something that was damaging to what she said and damaging to the prosecutor's case? When I confronted her with her own words, she denied originally making that post. When I walked up, showed her the exact things that she had posted or texted, she said, probably. I counted 16 times she used that word. If she didn't use the word probably after being confronting with her exact words, she said things like, I don't recall if that's what it says. She refused in just about every instance, ladies and gentlemen, to admitting to exactly what she had done and her exact words with regards to that. The only person that does that is someone who's trying to deceive you. Use your common sense. Use the ability that you use every day in your life when someone tells you something and you don't know them. And you consider all the factors that everyone does in making a decision as to whether or not someone is being truthful with you. Is there anyone in this courtroom that if presented with their own exact words on a post or a text would hesitate and accept that that's what you did say? She also lied about not sneaking around in the woods at night. Now, you've heard everything that Lauren Kanarek has done to Michael Barison. You heard from Michael McGrain. Remember, he testified there was one instance where she was in the woods sneaking around. She was dressed in all black with no shoes on. She lied to you. There is evidence that she lied to you. She also lied to you that the reason why she didn't leave was because she couldn't find a place to house her horses and train both her and those horses. You have the sworn testimony of Michael Barisone's attorney, Michael Tarshish's, where he says he told her, I got a place for you. It's right down the road with an Olympic quality athlete to train you and your horses. Lauren Kanarek didn't want to leave. Lauren Kanarek was never leaving that property. Lauren Kanarek was getting free living accommodations. She was only paying for 2 horses. That was a lie to you. She also said she was never officially told to leave. Attorney Steve Tarshish took that stand and said, that's not true. I served an eviction complaint on her. He had the proof of service that she personally received that document. Now, I'm sure the prosecutor is going to say, well, that was a dummy complaint, and I don't even know what he's going to say or comment with regards to it. But the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, she was officially served. Whether it's a dummy complaint or not, she still had an official document to leave. She didn't know it was a dummy complaint before the shooting. She didn't say, well, I got a complaint, and my lawyer looked at it, we checked it. She said, I never was officially served. Lie number 6. Let's go to number 7. Recall her testimony with regards to why she turned Michael Barisone into the town. Remember that 2-page letter that her and Goodwin had concocted? Her testimony to you was that there was a faulty dryer. We were concerned the barn was going to burn down. Do you really think that that was her motivation? Or do you think it was part of her plan, like all these other things, to destroy Michael Barisone? If you're concerned about a faulty dryer, if you're concerned about it possibly starting a fire, pull the plug out. You don't need to write a 2-page letter trying to get Michael Barisone kicked out of his last place of refuge. Do you really, honestly think, ladies and gentlemen, that that was her motivation? A faulty dryer. Based on everything that you know at this point, I submit that she lied to you. Finally, with regards to her bold-faced, despicable lies in this courtroom, is she lied about not searching for DYFUS Anonymous hotline. Recall her testimony. When I confronted her, did you call DYFUS? No. When I confronted her on the stand with her own phone records indicating that she had searched DYFUS's anonymous hotline on 2 separate occasions, on 2 separate days, what was her response? How could she explain that? Her explanation? Oh, someone must have stolen my phone. And then she tries to blame it on Justin Harding. Do you honestly believe there's any possibility on the face of the earth to think that Justin Harding would steal her phone to look something up? Not once, but on 2 separate occasions. If she's lying about this, she's lying about the shooting. She's lying about the incident. If the lies are not good enough for you, good enough to convince you not to believe her, look at her inconsistent statements. And just like you do in everyday conversations, if someone says something one time and then comes back and says something different, don't you normally question the truthfulness of those statements? And again, it depends on the significance, but that's a common thing that all of you do. Look at Kanarek's inconsistent statements. She originally told the prosecutor's office soon after the incident that she disappeared. She doesn't even know where she went. On cross, when I tried to question her with respect to that, she comes up with this crazy story that she meant disappearing in her mind. And then I asked her, did you run away or walk away from the area? And she demonstrated what she claims that she did. She also never mentioned in her original statement that she beat Michael Barisone for 7 minutes. On direct, before I cross-examined her, before I showed her the post in her own words about beating him for 7 minutes, she tried to make light of what she did. She said, I hit him a few times. 7 minutes is not a few times. She testified before you that she had gone up and down the stairs numerous times. She never said that in her original statement, and I'm going to get to that in a second. And I submit, if she did do what she said in this courtroom about going back and forth as she did, that it was before any shot. In her original statement, she said Robert Goodwin was in the house at the time of the shooting. Recall, I brought out that in her statement. She said she ran to the door after being shot and told him not to come out. Now she's saying on direct examination that he was outside. Major inconsistency. What should really bother you, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to ask you when you get back in that room and you start talking about things, look at the crime scene photos. The crime scene photos introduced by the prosecutor. And I have one here. What should really bother you is the location of the phones at the crime scene. How did Michael Barisone's phone get on that table? On that round metal table by the bush? No one talked about him having a phone in his hand. Kanarek and Goodwin never talked about Robert Goodwin having a phone. If you're going to shoot somebody, if you're coming down there to kill somebody, why would you have your phone in your hand? How did Michael Barisone's phone get on that table? Was there an argument? Did he try to call 911 like he had done many times and an altercation started? How did Michael Barisone's phone get on that table? More troubling. And I ask you to look at the photographs. How did Lauren Kanarek and Robert Goodwin's phones get at the base of the umbrella stand? Both phones are at the base of the umbrella stands. That is totally inconsistent. That is reasonable doubt. It disputes what Kanarek and Goodwin said. Recall her testimony regarding the use of the phones. This is important, and it should send a shiver up your spine. She says she's holding Robert Goodwin's phone when she's shot. Remember, she's on the phone with her civil lawyer. That should raise a red flag on its own. She says, after being shot, she put the phone down. She walks over, climbs up the stairs, and grabs her phone. She says she tries to call 911. I don't know why she didn't try to call 911 on Goodwin's phone, but this is her testimony. She says she tries to call 911. Her phone doesn't work. She puts it down on the top landing. She walks down the stairs. She walks over to where she placed the phone down by Goodwin and Barison. She picks up Goodwin's phone. And calls 911. That was her testimony. and you heard the 911 call. At some point during that call, she hands the phone to Goodwin. She then says she walks back up the stairs, retrieves her phone, turns, walks down the stairs, walks over to where Barisone and Goodwin are, and starts beating Michael Barisone with her phone for 7 minutes. So we have the 911 call. We have her beating Barisone in this area. How do the phones get on the umbrella base 10, 12, 13 yards away? All supposedly after being shot. Does that make sense to you? Is it physically impossible for someone to be shot in the chest twice and do all that? Let's look at Robert Goodwin's testimony. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that based on what you know about Robert Goodwin, that he would do or say anything to help Lauren Kanarek. After all, she's the one paying for everything. She's the one getting them free living accommodations. She's paying him to hang around with the horses. Remember, he is one of the people, him and the father, who had a plan to destroy Michael Barisone. He was the one, ladies and gentlemen, that purchased all the recorders and cameras. He was the person that was secreting the recorders and then retrieving them on behalf of Lauren Kanarek. He's the one, ladies and gentlemen, who wrote the letter to the town. He's the one, ladies and gentlemen, that turned off the camera that would have captured this entire incident. In his original statement, he said he only heard shots. In this courtroom, before you, he claims that he actually saw Michael Barisone shooting. Totally different, inconsistent with his statement the night of the incident. Some things that Goodwin did say that are helpful. Michael Barisone was never violent. Michael Barisone never threatened him or Lauren Kanarek. He totally disputed the prosecutor's statement that Michael was angry and furious at the time of the shooting. Described him, as I said, calm and sorrowful. But he also lied to you. He told you the same lie about those recordings. And again, I'm not going to go into the transcript with the lawyer, but clearly, ladies and gentlemen, those recordings were not all made from Lauren Kanarek's locker. In his original statement, he said the same thing Kanarek said in her original statement, that she disappeared. He testified in this courtroom that Kanarek only hit Barisone in the face a few times. That's inconsistent with the 7-minute beating that Kanarek posted about. What's also important, and I don't know how much significance you think this is, neither of them ever mentioned that their dog had attacked Michael Barisone. And we're not talking about a simple nipping. You heard medical testimony from the doctor that treated Michael Barison that he had numerous puncture wounds all over his body. One of which was a puncture wound to his inside groin area. How did that happen? When did that happen? Why didn't Kanarek, why didn't Goodwin ever mention that the dog was mauling Michael Barison? And what I submit should offend you is the prosecutor introducing a cute photograph of the dog in the background, just sitting up and, very, very calmly. That dog attacked Ruth Cox. That dog attacked Michael Barison. That dog even attacked the police officer who arrived on the scene. His name is Rosie. I'm calling it Cujo. Why would the prosecutor even think about introducing that photograph? What possible reason other than to try to give you a different impression? The defense put on two highly qualified, distinguished experts. Those two experts, ladies and gentlemen, I believe are far more compelling and believable than the state's one expert. They spent more time with Michael Barison and did a much more thorough evaluation than the state's doctor, Dr. Schlesinger. Most important, Dr. Simmering saw Michael Barison soon after the incident, within a month, and he testified, and was never disputed by the state's doctor, that it's important, and you get a better sense of what happened and a better evaluation if you evaluate someone close in time to the incident. Does that make sense to anybody? Is that psychological mumbo-jumbo? It's important that when you're considering these experts, the defense and the state, that you consider that the defense experts do both work for the prosecutor's office and defense lawyers. If you look at Dr. Simmering and his testimony, his credentials were amazing. His experience was amazing. And what's important and what you should consider is that he's been hired numerous times by the Morris County Prosecutor's Office. This office that is prosecuting this case. He's indicated he's been retained. He's been relied on by that office many times. It's going to be interesting to see how the prosecutor attacks him when their office has used him numerous times. Dr. Simmering is a psychiatrist, a medical doctor. He's clearly more educated, has more experience than the state's doctor, Schlesinger, in evaluating people in criminal cases. What's odd, ladies and gentlemen, is that although Dr. Schlesinger, the state expert, says, I disagree with Dr. Simmering's diagnosis, he never explained why or what the basis was. Clearly, he had no problem attacking Dr. Hassan, one of the defense experts, after Dr. Hassan corrected and questioned the method and scoring of the test he gave Michael Barison. I submit to you, it seemed like almost a personal attack. Like, how dare you question me? When someone says things on the stand like, geez, I don't want to be too critical of someone, and then clearly goes out of their way to attack them, you should question their testimony. The fact is, with regards to the state expert, Dr. Schlesinger, he spent, and I timed it, 45 minutes talking about himself and all his awards. He spent no time telling you why he disagreed with Dr. Simmering. He also testified, and I asked you to recall this point, that he only spent about an hour or so testing Michael Barison. That's only 15 minutes more than him talking about himself. The state's doctor Dr. Schlesinger said he only spent 13 hours total with Michael Barison as compared to 37 hours that Dr. Hassan, one of the defense experts, spent. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that the state's expert's testimony appeared rehearsed, scripted. How many times did he volunteer things, talk about providing the prosecutor with the articles or books? Oh, I gave you that article, prosecutor, or that book I gave you. I now know where the prosecutor got those articles that he used to try to attack Dr. Hassan. Why would Dr. Schlesinger give those articles and books to Prosecutor Schellhorn when everybody knows, and it's been testified to, there are an equal number of articles and books in the psychiatric field that say the exact opposite thing? Dr. Schlesinger basically is a hired gun for prosecutors' offices in New Jersey and New York. He testified he has another case with this prosecutor's office. He tried to soften that when I had brought out that my experts do work for both sides. Always have, always will. He tried to soften that by saying, well, the first third of my career, I did work for defense lawyers. The second third, I did both. But basically the last third, I'm doing almost exclusively work for the prosecutor's offices. Well, if you divide up that 30-year career, the last 10 years, all he's been doing is rendering opinions for county prosecutors' offices all over the state. And I'm going to ask you to use your common sense. How long do you think he would keep doing that if he didn't support the prosecutor's position? Not very long. The fact is, and what the evidence, and he didn't even dispute this, he did shorter versions of the tests he gave. He didn't do anywhere near as many tests as Dr. Hassan did. Dr. Hassan took Schlesinger's data, his results, that he hand scored, and put them into a computer program, and got a totally different profile. A profile that confirmed the delusional disorder that he and Simmering had testified to. The exact same data. He didn't make anything up. He took Schlesinger's data that he collected, put it in a program, and got a different result. What does that tell you? Dr. Hassan also did many more tests. He tried to look at this case and the diagnosis from all sorts of different angles. Schlesinger was focused. He had like blinders on. I submit that Dr. Hassan is not only consistent with Simmering's diagnosis, but it also provided you with expert testimony concerning a battery of tests, a whole group of tests that he did that are also consistent with that diagnosis. What's really important, and what should bother you, what should cause you to throw out Dr. Schlesinger's entire diagnosis is this. He never talked to Michael Barisone's therapist. Both Hassan and Simmering did interviews with the therapist. A therapist that had treated Barisone on and off for 20 years. Schlesinger testified he looked at some text messages between the two, but never talked to her. Never even attempted to talk to her. That, I submit, is important. And why is it important? Because you have two doctors, and it's not disputed, even by Schlesinger, that a person's prior psychiatric history is important. And a person, just like a regular doctor, have you ever had this before? You ever have family members that have had this or that? It's something that's normal in the field, as it is in the medical field. Particularly when formulating a current diagnosis. Both defense doctors had stated that based on that interview, that they were provided with information with regards to Michael's history. They were provided with information that Schlesinger never talked about traumatic events in his life as a child. Both of those doctors said that it's important and may make someone more susceptible to issues later on in life. Is that an outrageous, unreasonable statement? Or is it common sense? Use your everyday experiences. Dr. Schlesinger, the state's doctor, never mentioned that Michael Barisone's mother physically abused him. Never mentioned that Michael Barison was sexually molested over and over again. Dr. Schlesinger never mentioned that his therapist had indicated he had issues with delusions prior to this incident. The same diagnosis, or related to the same diagnosis, as Dr. Simmering and Dr. Hassan had testified to. How can you just leave that out? The state's doctor's position, and we're going to address this, is basically that Michael Barisone's fears are real. That both Barisone and other members believe that Lauren Kanarek's threat to kill was real and reality-based. Is he saying that Lauren Kanarek is a danger? Is he saying that Lauren Kanarek and Robert Goodwin had the wherewithal to kill Michael Barisone, his girlfriend, and their children? If that's the case, if that's something that that doctor can glean just from reviewing the police reports as to what happened, why didn't Washington Township Police Department, why didn't the Morris County Prosecutor's Office intercede in the numerous times when Michael Barisone told them he was in fear, told them that Lauren Kanarek was dangerous, tried to show him all the posts and information that Dr. Schlesinger said clearly indicates that she is a danger and a danger is imminent. Remember, those two people are the state's case. Dr. Schlesinger then tries to bolster his opinion by saying, well, because other staff members also felt threatened, that proved his point. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous. Every person is different. You don't need to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist to understand that. Some people are more susceptible to others. Look at all the people that you know. Is somebody stronger? Does someone hear or handle stress differently? Everybody is unique. Past medical history is also important. Dr. Simmering, Dr. Hassan testified that past psychiatric history, like prior traumatic events, can cause someone to react differently than someone who didn't have those events. Makes sense? Psychological mumbo-jumbo? As I said, every person is unique. Every person has a breaking point. Some people are stronger than others. The doctors that the defense put on looked at Michael Barisone as an individual differently than Schlesinger's general statements. They said that based on his past mental health issues, that specific things that were done to him caused him to react differently than others. The state's doctor never addressed Michael Barisone's unique circumstances. And again, let me point out an example why I think it's important. Kanarek does something to both Mary Haskins Gray and Michael Barisone. Mary Haskins Gray is afraid. Michael Barisone crawls up in a fetal position, is inconsolable, and is crying hysterically. She testified that that happened numerous times. Clearly, Barisone is in a much different position than Haskins and everyone else at the farm. He's the owner of the farm. It's his business that they're attacking, not Gray's, not anyone else. He's the one responsible for protecting everyone. Most of the attacks are directed specifically towards him, that he abuses horses, is a criminal, did insurance fraud, that he is the one that has bullied Kanarek and threatened her life. All those false allegations were against him, not anyone else. They have a different impact on him and everyone else. The house that he fled was his house. Haskins was just a girlfriend. No history, no investment in that property. It makes a difference. If I'm someplace that I don't own and something happens, I could just leave. It's different when you leave your own house. It causes you to react differently. Michael Barison had no one there to help him or protect him. Mary Haskins Gray had Barison. Mary Haskins Gray had her father come and try to protect him. Michael Barison was in a unique position. Michael Barison was the one that Robert Goodwin took his hand, made it in the gesture of a gun, pulled the trigger, and told him the day before the shooting to get ready. Get ready. Get ready. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that his unique psychiatric history, the fact that the majority of threats were directed at him and his business, and the fact that he was the sole person responsible, puts him in a much different category. And when you're discussing his mental state and what effect these things had on him, don't go with Schlesinger's general statement that, well, the other people were afraid too. Totally different. No one else, ladies and gentlemen, were calling people to try to get help, like Michael Barisone was. No one fled his own home. No one hired a private investigator to do background checks on them. No one spent $5,000. Think about this. When the prosecutor maybe comes up with some cockamamie story with regards to a financial issue or problem, Steve Tarshis testified that Barison was worth millions. No one else filed a complaint with Safe Sport against Kanarek. Now, I'm sure the prosecutor's going to make some argument with regards to why this happened. If the prosecutor suggests to you that the motive is that Michael Barison thought a complaint was going to be made against him with Safe Sport, and that's the reason why he wanted to kill Lauren Kanarek, then when he says those words, I want you to think, well, Michael Barisone filed a complaint against Lauren Kanarek. Does she have a motive to kill him? You can't have it both ways. That's what I'm saying. Think about everything that's said to you. No one else called 911 on 4 separate occasions. No one else was turned away and felt as helpless when the police and the Morris County Prosecutor's Office wouldn't help him. Didn't even want to look at the documents, the things that he had amassed in this investigation that he was doing on Kanarek. He even personally went to the Washington Township Police Department and tried to plead with them for help. What impact would that have on someone different than everyone else? When you call the people that are supposed to protect you and they do nothing, what impact does that have on someone's state of mind? He also hired a personal security guard, Mr. Davison, to sit excuse me, in his truck to to guard the stable area. I submit he had a lawyer write letters and serve a complaint. That, coupled with all the things that Kanarek was doing specifically to him, puts him in a unique category that you should consider. Remember, what was Kanarek's motivation? She admitted to a plan to destroy him and the business. That plan included attacking him on social media, accusing him falsely of neglecting horses, insurance fraud, falsely claiming bullying and threatening her life. She had a plan to scare him. Remember the text that that I questioned her about? We have to scare Michael Barison. And then the various texts after that, where she's talking about Michael Barison being scared. Totally different circumstances. I submit that she had a plan to cause him to flee his own house by scaring him, talking about weapons incessantly, sleeping with a gun underneath her pillow, having 2 guns, 2 9mm guns, talking about killing the king, sacrificing the queen, destroying the castle, talking incessantly about going to war. It's time. War's inevitable. Why would anyone say those things unless they were trying to drive someone over the edge? What possible legitimate purpose would they have attacking him like that? She knew he was emotionally unstable. She knew she was scaring him. She knew that all the things that she was doing, like posting his own words and taunting him with them, would cause him to go insane. Why would someone do that? Take private conversations and use them against that individual. What effect would that have on someone who's becoming emotionally unstable? Does he think he's hearing voices? Does he think everything that he says is being recorded? Is that a rational assumption? Does he know for sure? What effect would that have on someone's mental state? And there's testimony that the majority of that taunting was directed specifically towards him. What would it take for someone to leave their own home? Think about that. What would it take for someone to flee their own home? What effect did Kanarek and Goodwin and the father have on kicking him out of the place that he fled to, the stable area? He's now sleeping on a couch, living out of a suitcase in the stable area. She made him homeless. And someone may think or argue, well, you could have just gone to a hotel. That's what one of the town people said. He can't leave his property. He's afraid that Lauren Kanarek, Goodwin, and the father are going to destroy his business. People are afraid that they're going to burn down the barn or hurt their horses. Why is Cox sleeping in front of her horse in the stables? He can't leave all this. This is what he built up from nothing, ladies and gentlemen. He's already fled his house. Do you think it's realistic to think that he would just leave the property and leave it to Kanarek, Goodwin, and the father? You heard testimony from numerous witnesses that he wasn't sleeping. He was wandering the property at night, trying to protect everyone. Who does that? And finally, there's evidence that Kanarek set forth steps to have DCPP come onto the property. Barison told all the experts, the defense and the state expert, that he overheard her talking about sexual misconduct. And that's when he had the breakdown. What's odd, based on Dr. Schlesinger's testimony, is that no one, including Schlesinger, is saying that Michael Barisone is faking his physical and psychological deterioration in the days leading up to the incident. Numerous people took this stand, put their hand on the Bible, and testified to Michael Barisone's decline and failing mental state prior to the incident. It's not something we're setting forth after the fact, prior to the incident. And the prosecutor could have called all these people if he wanted to give you the real picture. All of those witnesses, and I think I put on 23, 24 different people, all of them testified to various observations they made about his decline. Some of them were graphic. I'll name a few. Not sleeping, not bathing, eating, wandering the property at night, unable to carry on a conversation, incapable of handling simple business affairs, crying, sobbing, hysterically in a fetal position. Those people compared Barisone before and after Lauren Kanarek's attacks. He went from this confident, elegant, dignified man to a distraught, disheveled person, pacing aimlessly, mumbling to himself, was described as catatonic. If you recall, the town official, Ms. Gibbs Cook, said on the 6th she could barely recognize who he was from how she had known him before. She described him as undone. Her words. Many of those people who had known him for years, in seeing this decline, thought he was going to kill himself. And numerous people, Olympic athletes, testified that they called and they tried to console him. He was unconsolable. All because of Kanarek, Goodwin, and the father's attacks. Justin Hardin, who was a state's witness, who has known Michael Barisone for 17 years, described him as out of his mind. Others testified he was unable to function. The one thing Justin Hardin said, which to me hits home, is Michael Barisone's love for horses, love for riding. He stopped riding. He stopped teaching, training people in horses. That speaks volume as to his mental decline. All these people testified as to Michael Barisone's systematic destruction of him, all at the hands of Kanarek It was her plan, and her plan worked. They drove him crazy. The state wants you to believe that Michael Barisone, after experiencing this level of deterioration, was capable, after the severe beating that he got from Robert Goodwin, after he was choked unconscious, how somehow, miraculously, he flipped a switch and had the presence of mind to make up a story. I don't remember the event. This is totally inconsistent with every piece of evidence that has been put before you. The prosecutor's going to suggest, I assume, that after all of this, that Michael Barison should be taken with regards to his statements as an admission of his guilt. When he starts talking about that, recall all the evidence of his mental state when these statements were allegedly made. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, that every single person, the police officers, the medical people that were treating him, everyone had indicated that when Michael Barisone was asked about the events, he had no recollection. So his rambling statements, I had a good life, they destroyed my life, what does that mean? Under those circumstances, in his condition, I submit the ramblings from a man suffering from a mental breakdown, a man who's delusional. What's outrageous, ladies and gentlemen, is the prosecutor's attempt to argue that Michael Barisone's statement at the hospital, "I'm sorry," was an admission of guilt. That detective couldn't testify to the circumstances where the statement was made, any context. He didn't even know the exact words. He said, well, words to the effect. What should concern you is that the detective didn't remember who was there, whether or not he was talking to anyone, and doesn't remember the exact words. I ask you to remember that with regard to that statement, "I'm sorry," it was not contained in his detailed notes that he took contemporaneous with everything that was going on. He also never put or testified on direct examination that before that statement, Michael Barisone was injected with 100 milligrams of fentanyl. Fentanyl. Prior to that statement. Why didn't the prosecutor bring that out? Isn't that important? Aren't those details something that you should consider? Before you're deciding whether or not that's an admission of guilt, don't you think you should have all the facts? And even though there is no burden on the defense, I don't need to do or say anything. Don't you think things like that would be important in you assessing what that statement meant? Why is the defense constantly bringing out things differently than what's originally proposed to you? I ask you to recall also that that report was dated over 2 months later. Tried to explain that, well, the report, there's no evidence of that. You have his testimony. The next cop that took the stand, I asked him the same thing with regards to the date of the report, and he says that's when the report was written. What's going on here, ladies and gentlemen? And if you believe what every medical person said about Michael Barisone not remembering the specific incident, I submit you can't be sorry for something you don't remember. And again, this is the linchpin of the state's doctor's diagnosis. That's all he talked about. You have 2 doctors that the defense put on that address this issue, address, again, the concern of the state doctor that someone charged with a criminal defense may feign symptoms, may fake. Dr. Schlesinger never suggested that Barisone was faking the things that happened to him before the incident. He focused solely on the statement, "I don't remember." Recall the actual testimony, the evidence. The first officer on the scene, Barisone's partially conscious. These aren't defense witnesses, although I had to bring it out. The second officer, incoherent. The third officer, "I need to wake up. Is this real?" Someone questioning their reality. Every medical person, and the prosecutor was not able to put one person on to dispute this. Every single medical person that talked to Michael Barisone said that he could not recall the event. They described him as confused, and even said he was in an altered mental state. First aid, ambulance people, EMS, hospital personnel, and even the doctor at the jail days later said the same thing. If Michael Barisone wanted to lie about something to protect himself because he's tried with a criminal offense, don't you think, ladies and gentlemen, this bright, intelligent man could come up with something better? Use your common sense. He could have made up a much better story. Kanarek had a gun. I shot her. I was getting the hell beaten out of me. The dog was mauling me. I shot her in self-defense. Don't you think he could have come up with something better than "I don't remember"? That ties his hands. It doesn't help him. It puts me in a position where I'm chasing windmills like Don Quixote. "I don't remember" doesn't help him. What it does, ladies and gentlemen, it gives you a basis to believe Dr. Simmering and Dr. Hassan. If that's not enough, I submit there's overwhelming evidence that that statement is truthful. Both Simmering and Hassan looked at that issue and believed and testified that that loss of memory is real and was either caused by the beating he took to his head or the psychological breakdown. Dr. Hassan even did specific psychological tests to test for feigning. Dr. Schlesinger never did those. Why not? Because it doesn't fit in with his scenario to help the prosecutor. But Dr. Hassan testified that he did those tests, and those tests indicated that there was no feigning. Dr. Schlesinger didn't take those results like Hassan did and say, oh, that's wrong, those are inaccurate. You can't throw out your common sense. You need to look at all the evidence. You need to rely on the most qualified and experienced experts with no agenda. In closing, I ask you to listen carefully to the judge's instruction on insanity. Once the defense establishes by the preponderance of the evidence, the state, as it always does, has the burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. That burden never shifts. That is what this country, our legal system, is based upon. I submit, ladies and gentlemen, the defense has established clearly that Michael Barisone was insane at the time of the incident. He was suffering from a mental defect, a delusional disorder, and did not know the nature and quality of his actions, and did not know right from wrong. What Lauren Kanarek, Robert Goodwin, and the father did to him was horrible. Horrible. They had a plan to destroy Michael Barisone. Don't let them use you to do the job, to finish the bastard. Find Michael Barisone not guilty. It is the right and just thing to do. Thank you.
I thank the council. Ladies and gentlemen, it's almost 11 o'clock. We'll take our morning recess, then we'll hear from Mr. Shellhorn for the state and his summation. Thank you. Please don't discuss the case.